Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. In my last video, I looked at some graffiti inside the subterranean chamber of the Great Pyramid, which looked to have had an esoteric meaning, mentioning a high priest and high priestess, Atlantis, Apollo, Apollonius of Tyana, as well as other words I couldn't make out. It was scrawled above the entrance to the chamber in March 1905, and one of the comments by a viewer said, "In my opinion, this could be the handiwork of Aleister Crowley, as he was in the Great Pyramid around this time and performed rituals there." Many other viewers also made similar claims. The timing does seem about right, and I knew that Aleister Crowley did go to Egypt sometime around the turn of the 20th century. So this led me on to another short research project. Could this writing actually be the handiwork of a man once called the wickedest man in the world? Aleister Crowley, real name Edward Alexander Crowley, born October 1875, is a fascinating character of British history. So much so that his notoriety got him on the cover of the Beatles' LP, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. We can see Crowley in the back row on the left. Some viewers may already know a lot about him, some of you may never have heard of him, but in a nutshell, Crowley or Crowley, however you say it, was a famous occultist and practiced magic. He wrote books and poetry and founded the religion of Thelema. He said he was a prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus in the early 20th century. He could invoke spirits and demons, and was a master in understanding esoteric knowledge and traditions. In his early life, he had rejected his parents' hardline fundamentalist Christian faith and wished to pursue esoteric teachings instead. His father died when he was 11, and he did not have a happy or fun childhood, and he put this down to living within a fundamentalist Christian faith. Aleister Crowley was no fool, and by all accounts he was an intelligent man. In 1898 he joined the esoteric Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and there he learned ceremonial magic. He studied Hinduism and Buddhism in India, experimented with drugs and sex, took an interest in philosophy and yoga, and also learned several languages. His Christian mother would go on to label him the great beast of the Bible. He had a deep knowledge in Western esoteric traditions, had learned much from the cultures of the Middle and Far East, and said he could induce astral visions and invoke spirits, with and without the aid of drugs. This information is all very general, but you can see he was a very intriguing character, and that was even before he married the wealthy socialite Rose Edith Kelly. The wedding in August 1903 would be the beginning of a new chapter in Crowley's life. For a while, he actually seems to have ditched the esoteric and spiritual path in favour of world travel, leisure and sport. The marriage did not have the blessing of Kelly's parents, and the couple actually eloped, so Kelly did not have to have an arranged marriage. Although in truth they barely knew each other, some say it was love at first sight, and the couple did enjoy an extended honeymoon, travelling across Europe to Paris, Marseille and Naples, and then in November 1903 they found themselves in Cairo in Egypt. Now, even some respected and well-watched history YouTube channels get the details of Crowley's visit very wrong, saying he was inside the Great Pyramid in March 1904, when, in truth, he wasn't, and that he wrote the famous Book of the Law inside, which he himself says he doesn't. Crowley only talks of one instance inside the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and that was in November 1903. In Crowley's own words, it was one of the extravagances of our passion that suggested our spending a night together in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid. It was the gesture of a male showing off his plumage. Yes, on their honeymoon, Aleister Crowley and his wife Rose Edith spent one night alone in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. A man with a deep esoteric knowledge, who had practiced magic, now newly married and genuinely in love, took his wife into the King's Chamber for the night, to, in effect, show off his magical abilities. What happened that night, we only have Crowley's own words, and they can't be corroborated, but I will read his own account from his own autobiography. Crowley says, "I wanted my wife to see what a great magician I was. We went accordingly after dinner with candles. More from habit than anything else, as I imagine, I had with me a small notebook of Japanese vellum, in which were written my principal invocations, etc. Among these was a copy of the Preliminary Invocation of the Goetia. We reached the King's Chamber after dismissing the servants at the foot of the Grand Gallery. By the light of a single candle placed on the edge of the coffer, I began to read the invocation. But as I went on, I noticed that I was no longer stooping to hold the page near the light. I was standing erect, but the manuscript was not less but more legible. Looking about me, I saw that the King's Chamber was glowing with a soft light, which I immediately recognised as the astral light. I have been accustomed to describe the colour as ultraviolet from its resemblance to those rays in the spectrum, which I happen to be able to distinguish. The range varies, but it is quite noticeably beyond that visible to the normal human eye. The colour is not unlike that of an arc lamp. It is definitely less coloured than the light of a mercury lamp. If I had to affix a conventional label, I should probably say pale lilac, but the quality of the light is much more striking than the colour. Here the word phosphorescence occurs to the mind. It is one of the mysteries of physics that the total light of the sky is very much greater than can be accounted for by the luminous bodies in the heavens. There are various theories, but I personally believe that the force now called radioactivity, which we know to be possessed in some degree by every particle of matter, is responsible. Our eyes are affected with the impression of light by forces, which are not in themselves recognised as luminous. However, back to the facts. The King's Chamber was aglow, as if with the brightest tropical moonlight. The pitiful, dirty yellow flame of the candle was like a blasphemy, and I put it out. The astral light remained during the whole of the invocation, and for some time afterwards, though it lessened in intensity as we composed ourselves to sleep. For the rest, the floor of the King's Chamber is particularly uncompromising. In sleeping out on rocks, one can always accommodate oneself more or less to the local irregularities, but the King's Chamber reminded me of Brand, and I must confess to having passed a very uncomfortable night. I fear medallions had corrupted my Roman virtue. In the morning the astral light had completely disappeared, and the only sound was the flitting of the bats. In a sort of way, I suppose I did consider myself rather a fine fellow to have been able to produce so striking a phenomenon with so little trouble. So that is pretty much all we know about Aleister Crowley's night in the King's Chamber, and again, it's only his version of events. And his astral light magic can't be corroborated because his wife Rose never spoke about it. Still, it is another interesting thought when we as tourists enter the King's Chamber today, to know that one of the most interesting and bizarre, and also most influential figures of recent history, performed a magical ritual inside. As stated, the ritual he read was the Preliminary Invocation of the Goetia, and this was apparently the first magic that Crowley had performed for some time. For those interested, and for some background, Crowley wrote the Book of the Goetia of Solomon the King, which was first published in 1904. It's basically a translation of the Lesser Key of Solomon, an anonymous compilation of demonology that was put together in the mid-17th century, but the writings are apparently a couple of centuries older. The Lesser Key of Solomon consists of 5 books, the first of which is called Ars Goetia, and it's all about the evocation of demons. In Latin, Goetia refers to the evocation of demons and evil spirits, and this comes from the ancient Greek word that's shown on screen, which means charm, witchcraft, or jugglery. Goetia was considered evil and heretical in Renaissance Europe, and Crowley's book is an English translation of a portion of Ars Goetia, together with unrelated original work and essays. The Preliminary Invocation, which he apparently said in the King's Chamber, is also known as the Bornless Ritual, and although a couple of pages long, as seen in the pages of his book which I've linked below, here is the final section.
I am he, the bornless spirit, having sight in the feet, strong, and the immortal fire. I am he, the truth. I am he who hates that evil should be wrought in the world. I am he that lighteneth and thundereth. I am he from whom is the shower of the life of earth. I am he whose mouth ever flameth. I am he, the begetter and manifester unto the light. I am he, the grace of the worlds. The heart girt with a serpent is my name.
Regarding esoteric rituals, magic and the invocation of spirits, well, in the words of Forrest Gump,
"Now I don't know much about anything."
But apparently this invocation of demonic spirits was said at night inside the Great Pyramid King's Chamber in November 1903, and apparently it did bring forth an astral light. In his own words, the magic successfully performed in front of his new wife gave him a proud glee, and 4 months later, back in Cairo in March 1904, and, as he says, having nothing better to do, Crowley would recite the same invocation again, although not inside the Great Pyramid or a cave as some claim, but inside his flat in Cairo. But this time it would send Rose, who he also called Uwada the Seer, into what he called a strange state of mind. Uwada is apparently the Arabic name for Rose. He says, I had never seen her anything at all like it before. She kept on repeating dreamily yet intensely, "They are waiting for you." Crowley even wrote, I was annoyed at her conduct, like he didn't believe what she was doing was real. Did he think she was high on drugs? Did he think she was joking or poking fun? I don't know. A few days later and Crowley would do it again, and Rose went into the same state of mind, repeating the same phrase as before, but she was also saying, it is all about the child, and all Osiris. Whilst in Egypt, what happened next would be truly life-changing for the Crowleys, and it starts part 3 of his own memoirs, titled The Advent of the Aeon of Horus. It's not ancient history, but it does concern the ancient Egyptian gods, including a starring role of Ra-Horakhti, the god personified by the Great Sphinx, and I can do a video on the subject if anyone's interested. I don't know if it's all true, I don't even know if it's possible, whether such rituals are safe or dangerous or even real, or just the mind and drugs playing tricks. There is information on Goetia on the internet and YouTube, and it's not something I've any personal interest in. I've only looked into it to flesh out this video to provide the viewer with some background knowledge. This sort of thing, dabbling in the occult, is not something I'd recommend or practice myself. But saying that, and Aleister Crowley is undoubtedly a fascinating character of history, and he did spend the night in the Great Pyramid, but was he responsible for the graffiti in the Subterranean chamber? Well, in actual fact, probably not. In February 1905, a month before the graffiti was done, Crowley was in Switzerland, and was apparently still there in July. I guess it's possible that in March he could have gone to Egypt, but I think he would have made a record of such a visit. But Crowley did write a book called Atlantis, the Lost Continent, a somewhat unique take on the Atlantis myth, and inside he does mention a high priest and high priestess, and even names the latter. It is admittedly a work of fiction, and he says the tsunamis and earthquakes came about after the entire main island blasted off on a one-way trip to Venus. It was quite normal at the time for occult writers to weave Atlantis into their work. Yes, the story by Crowley was a work of fiction, but he did apparently include real magical ritualistic knowledge into the book. As stated in my last video, esoteric subjects were growing in popularity at the turn of the 20th century, just like Crowley's notoriety. He certainly lived life to the full, but not without major international controversy. But he has left a lasting legacy, that's for sure, and a BBC poll in 2002 placed him at number 73 in the top 100 greatest Britons. In popular culture, he has influenced Led Zeppelin, the Beatles, Ozzy Osbourne and David Bowie. David Bowie does reference Crowley in the lyrics of the song Quicksand, and it is also believed the famous #1 song Let's Dance was actually paraphrasing a 1923 poem by Crowley called Lyric of Love to Leah, where Crowley uses the phrase "let us dance" many times, often at the beginning of verses. Today, Crowley is still looked upon as a source of inspiration by many people in search of spiritual enlightenment, and, interestingly, it does seem that a key moment in his life was conducting a magical ritual inside the Great Pyramid, a ritual which, when performed again a few months later, would change the direction of his life forever, and why some would call him the wickedest man in the world. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.